All right, here we go with the last little bit with complex numbers. So in this case, that we're going to be multiplying complex numbers. And, since every number is complex, we've always done this, but really more so is what we're doing is we're multiplying imaginary numbers, okay, just in complex form. So again, before we look at multiplying these imaginary numbers, let's think about what we would do when we had something like this. And this is not new, okay? What do we do when we have something like that, right, to multiply? Well, we just repeatedly distribute, right? That's all we're doing. We take x times x, get x squared. Then we take x times 3, right? X times 3. Then we take 2 times x. And then 2 times 3. And then we simplify by combining like terms, right? So then we have x squared, right in here. That simplifies to be plus 5x plus 6. And we're done, right? We multiplied that out, right? Combine our like terms. We get our answer, okay? So that's not new. Done that in the past. Continue to do that, okay? That's old. Now, that process, okay, when we're dealing with complex numbers is very, very, very similar. Okay, so when multiplying complex numbers, okay, essentially what we're going to do is we're going to multiply, okay, multiply. What we'll say is combine like terms. All right, combine like terms. Okay, and for us, that's going to be the real number, right, and imaginary numbers. Right, combine your like terms, and we're also going to simplify powers of I, all right, greater than 2. Actually, sorry, greater than 1. Okay, so any powers of I that are greater than 1 will simplify, whether it's I squared, I to the third, I to the 10th. Okay, so that's essentially what we got to do. We got to multiply it out. We're going to combine some like terms and simplify. All right, by combining like terms and simplifying our powers of I. Okay, so here are a couple examples of multiplying complex numbers. All right. So let's start with this one here. We'll go with I times 8 minus 3i. Okay, what's I times 8 minus 3i? All right, so here we go. We're going to distribute the I times 8. Right? I times 8 equals 8i. So in this case, all we would really be doing is distributing. Then I times 3i. Okay, I times 3i. So now we have minus 3i squared. Okay, so we multiplied. Now we got to simplify this. So here we go. Equals 8i. Okay. Now what is I squared? Right, you got to go over to your chart. You got to think about what is I squared. I squared is equivalent to -1. So I squared is equivalent to -1. So now we have minus 3 times I squared, but I'm going to put that here as a -1. And now what do we have? Well, we have -3 times a -1 is a +3. So this would be 8i plus 3. And then in standard form, all right, standard form is 3, then plus 8i. Okay, so that's what we have there, All right, what did we do? We distributed the I times 8, I times negative 3i. That gives me 8i and 3i squared. Now the that's a power of I greater than 1, so that's going to simplify. I squared is negative 1, so replace I squared with a negative 1. Then we do the arithmetic. Last thing right here, write it in standard form. Okay, so if you want to go make a little addendum up here, all right, simplify, and also last we'll say write in standard form. Okay, write in standard form. We're going to do a couple of these. Okay, do a couple of these. Let's go here. Let's do another one. Example 2 here of multiplying. All right, let's go with 3 plus I times 5 plus 2i. Okay, 3 plus I times 5 plus 2i. So what is it going to be equal to? Well, we got to distribute the 3 times the 5. 3 times 5, 15. Then 3 times 2i. 3 times 2i plus 6i. Then I times 5 plus 5i. And then lastly here, careful, I times 2i. I times 2i is going to be plus 2i squared. All right. So now we start to simplify here. We're going to have what? 15. What do we have there? Positive 6i plus 5i is plus 11i. And here we go again. I squared. What is I squared? It's a negative 1. So that's plus 2 times the negative 1. So then we have 15 plus 11i. Now 2 times negative 1 minus 2. All right, minus 2. And then lastly, combine our 15 minus 2 is 13. So the real number part first, plus 11i, the imaginary number part, and we are done. Okay, so there's the multiplying those two imaginary numbers. So there we had a case where we have 3 plus I times 5 plus 2i is 13 plus 11i. When we look up this one here, we had I times 8 minus 3i, 3 plus 8i. Just like we asked before, here I have an imaginary number times an imaginary number is an imaginary number. Here I have an imaginary number times an imaginary number is an imaginary number. So then questions could be, when you multiply two imaginary numbers, do you always get an imaginary number? Okay. Well, some of these we find answers to by looking at a counterexample. So suppose I had I times 8i, an imaginary number times an imaginary number. All right, what's that equal? Well, in this case, I times 8i is 8i squared. Okay, what is I squared? I squared is equivalent to 8 times now negative 1, which is negative 8. And what is negative 8? Negative 8 is a real number. So now we have an imaginary number times an imaginary number is in this case, a real number. So is an imaginary number times an imaginary number always real imaginary? Nope. Sometimes yes. Okay. That we could have an imaginary number times it's another imaginary number, either be real or imaginary. Okay. So there's nothing definitive about what you're going to get the type of number. Okay. I think let's do one more here. Ramp it up a little bit. All right, ready? So we're going to have I times 2 plus 3i times 4 minus 5i. Okay. Now, when you look at this, okay, there is not one straightforward way necessary to do it. You might do a couple different ways. Now, one thing I don't want you to do here because it's not correct. All right, let's just look at a little right here. If I said, what's 2 times 3 times 4, right? If I'm multiplying, you only ever multiply two factors at any time. So I take 2 times 3, right? Get 6 and then multiply by 4. Okay, or maybe I say 2 times 4 first, get 8 times then 3, still 24. Or maybe I say, well, let's do 3 times 4 first, get 2 times 12, still 24. Okay. What you don't do when you're multiplying is go, oh, let's take 2 times 3, get 6 times, and then 2 times 8, or 2 times 4, get 8, and then get 48. That's not right. Okay. So you would never do that in this scenario. I've never seen anyone do that there. However, I do see students do it over here. They'll take I, multiply into this binomial, and also take I and multiply into this one. Well, that's wrong. It's just like the 2 times 3 times 4. You have I times this number times this number. So you only ever multiply any two. So if I'm going to take I times all that stuff inside there, then I'm going to write the result down and then times 4 minus 5I. Okay? It's different when you're distributing when there's a plus or minus in between. So one option here would be, yeah, let's just take I and distribute. I times 2 and I times 3I. Okay? In which case I'm going to get 2I, right, plus 3I squared times 4 minus 5I. Okay? Now at this point, I'm going to write it down again, the same thing, because we're going to do this one two different ways. I don't care how you do it, okay? Certain times, yeah, one way might be a little more beneficial than another way, okay? Ultimately, if you do it and you do it correctly, we're good to go. So over here, this option would be, notice I have I to the first, I squared. So this option would be to, let's simplify first. So I distributed this I, and now I'm going to simplify as I go. Okay? So what is I squared? Keep in mind, I squared is a negative 1. So I have 2I. Now, ready? That's a negative 1. Right here is a negative 1 times a positive 3 becomes minus 3. Right? So now I have here, I'm at this. Now I multiply these two. Okay, so we're going to distribute 2I times 4, 8I. Let's actually get rid of the arrow there first. So 8I. Then I'm going to take 2I times negative 5I. 2 times negative 5. Negative 10I times I. Don't forget that I squared. So we get negative 10I squared. Common mistake I see is negative 10, and then you just write I. No, it's 2I times 5I. So that's 2 times I times 5 times I. So that's 10I squared. Then I have a negative 3 times a positive 4. Minus 12, and then negative 3 times a negative 5. That'd be plus 15I. So now we're there. Multiply, simplify, right? So what do we got? Well, here we go. 8I. Right, these are all equal, right? As we go down the line, equals this, equals this. Now here we go. I squared is a negative 1 times a negative 10 becomes positive 10. Minus 12 plus 15I. And then lastly, we're going to write in standard form. Positive 10 minus 12 is a negative 2. 8I plus 15I is plus 23I. And we are done there. Okay, so in that one, what did we do? Well, we started up top by distributing that I, and we simplified, then multiplied, then simplified, right? So as we went along, as soon as I got greater than a power of 1, we simplified it. Okay. Now over here, let's not do it that way. Right? We've got an answer of negative 2 plus 23I. Over here, let's keep I as is, and then we'll just do all the simplifying at the end. So in this case, what do? I distribute the 2I. 2I times 4. I can't read the arrow. Equals 8I, right? Now, 2I times negative 5I. What's 2I times negative 5I? Negative 10I squared minus 10I squared. Now, positive 3I squared times positive 4. So that's going to be plus 12 I squared. And then lastly, positive 3I squared times negative 5I squared, or negative 5I. So there we're going to get positive 3 times negative 5, negative 15, I squared times I cubed. So minus 15I cubed. Okay. Now from here, we can start to simplify and combine like terms. Okay. And in this stage, there's multiple ways you can do it. You could, in this case, you have I squared and an I squared, negative 10I squared plus 12I squared. Or we could also simplify the powers of I. In the end, it's going to come out to be the same. All right. So in this case, what do we have? We have 8I. All right. Now as we go, let's think about this. I squared. What's I squared equal to? I squared is equal to negative 1. So here I have a negative 1 times a negative 10 is positive 10. Here I have a negative 1 times a positive 12 is minus 12. And then lastly, I cubed. What is I cubed? I cubed is equal to negative I. So now I have negative I. This is right here. When you see that, it's really a negative I times a negative 15. Well, negative times negative is positive. And then 15 times I is 15I. And if you look at this stage right here, notice that we are, all right, right there. Same thing. 8I plus 10 minus 12 plus 15I. 8I plus 10 minus 12 plus 15I. So you have options, all right? Understand one of them well, all right? Be able to do both of them, okay? It's up to you. If you don't mind keeping your powers of I and keep getting them bigger and bigger and then simplify at the end, do that. If along the way, as soon as you get a power of I that's greater than 1, simplify it, and do that, okay? The big thing is you got to be careful of your signs, right? And also, common mistake here is like when you do 3I squared times 5I, we just make that like 15I squared instead of I cubed, okay? So in the end, we could see that clearly this, which is this, is going to be the same. So this would simplify to be the same product, negative 2 plus 23I, right? So there's multiplying complex numbers and simplifying. And then the last bit we have for this complex numbers, and this isn't new, okay, is solving quadratic equations, right? With, now in this case, imaginary solutions, all right? Process-wise, nothing different in terms of solving these, okay? Not really anything different, okay? So let's start with, and really, it's just going through examples because we've solved quadratic equations. We've simplified with, well, we're going to get some radicals, and we simplified powers of I and stuff. So we're going to be dealing with that. So it's really just a matter of maybe looking at some examples and talking about some process. So we'll start with one that's pretty straightforward. So x squared equals negative 13. Now this should right away, you should look at that and go, yeah, there's no real number solution. If I take any number and square it, right, some unknown number, and multiply it by itself, well, I get 0 times 0, which is 0. That doesn't work. If I take any positive number and square it, I get a positive number. That doesn't work. If I take any number times itself, I'm also going to get a positive. So there's no way to square a number and get a negative 13 if your answer is a real number. So that tells me my answer has to be imaginary. Process-wise, what do? We take the square root on the left, equals, do not forget the plus minus right here, okay? Do not forget the plus and minus. Make sure you throw that in there. Plus and minus, the square root then of negative 13, okay? Now we simplify, okay? All right, we're solving and simplifying here. Well, what's the square root of x squared? X equals, now here we go, 13's prime, and I have this negative under a square root, so that's going to come out as an I. So what we're going to have, now imagine, this is one way to think about it. Let's use that. If I covered this up, right, let's forget that's there. What would this simplify to be there? That would simplify to be I times the square root of 13. All right, so this right here would simplify to be I times the square root of 13, and then we put what's underneath that black box in front of it. So the square root of negative 13 becomes, right here, this, that's not my one. 1 depend. This becomes I times the square root of 13. And then what do we have in front of it? Plus minus. Okay, so there's my answer. Okay, that's the solution there. Two imaginary solutions. Positive I times the square root of 13 and negative I times the square root of 13. And why I made a point of it is a common mistake is this kind of thing. Is that here, pay attention to what I'm saying the mistakes are. Here, a common mistake is pull the I out, but then write it like this. Okay? That's not correct because now what? This is I plus the square root of 13. It really needs to be I times the square root of 13. All right? So this is a big no. Don't do that. Okay? So there's the first one. Pretty straightforward. Really kind of one step in terms of solving for x. Beyond that, it's simplifying. Okay? So let's go with just one that has a little more going on. Okay? Something like 5x squared plus 33 equals 3. Okay? So in this case, we got to solve for x squared. So one option would be to think this way. At first, I have to get that right there, the box all by itself. So if I put my variable with the exponent in a box there, I have to get that by itself. I got to get rid of the 33 and the 5. So clearly, we would subtract 33. Make sure you do this stuff correctly. Subtract 33. If you know you need to write out steps, make sure you do that. 3 minus 33. Keep them. What's your sign? What's 3 minus 33? It's a negative. Now, it doesn't matter which way you subtract them. 33 minus 3 is 30. Then divide by 5. Divide by 5. X squared equals negative 6. Now we're to the point where we're just last example. So what are we going to do now? Let's go right over here. Take the square root of x squared. Do not forget. Plus minus. Take the square root of a negative 6. X equals plus minus. Now ready? 6 is what? 3 times 2. So 6 isn't going to simplify, but the negative 1 comes out as an I. So that comes out. So now we have plus minus I times the square root of 6. Okay. So there's that one solved. Pretty straightforward there. Okay. So don't overcomplicate that, again, too much. Okay. Should be, I think, pretty straightforward in terms of solving those, right? And simplifying. All right. Beyond that, let's go with we're gonna keep that one there. I was gonna do a little more, but I think that'd be a good start here. Not much else to do with these, you know. So if we solve this one, and I'm gonna just do this one just because it's simplifying really at the end. So this one, you know, minimal steps to solve for x, right? Add 8, add 8. So x squared is then equal to negative 36 plus 8 is going to be a negative. And now we just can do the subtraction however we want. 36 minus 8 is 28. And we take the square root on both sides. Square root of x squared equals plus minus the square root of a negative 28. Now we simplify. We have x equals plus minus. Now I'm going to write it out so we can see we have negative what? 28 is 4 times 7. So now negative 4 times, so that negative comes out as an I, and the 4 comes out as a 2. So that means out front, I'm going to have plus minus 2i, and then what's left is the square root of 7. And there, that one is now done. Okay, so we did that simplifying before. right? When we were just working on simplifying square roots, okay, with negatives and stuff. So that's all that adds on. Just the one thing here, be careful. Don't, make note of it. Don't put the 2i, all right? This 2i does not go in front of the plus and minus over there, okay? Plus and minus, you just bring on. Simplify this first, write down, then put the plus and minus. And that'll kind of take care of you maybe messing something up there, okay? So that takes care of everything there that we really got to cover for the complex numbers, the intro there, simplifying powers by, multiplying, adding, subtracting, and solving the quadratic equation with some imaginary roots, okay? So let's start with this. Watch this one over. If you have any questions, let me know.